The small-town community hall was filled with cheerful chatter, soft laughter, and the sound of piano keys being tested before the performances began. It was the annual music showcase, an event where families, students, and local performers came together to share their talent. The air was light, filled with excitement and nervous energy. People were dressed in their best clothes, ready to impress the audience that filled almost every seat. Among them was a quiet young woman who had been sitting at the far end of the hall for nearly an hour. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes occasionally glancing toward the stage where a shiny grand piano stood waiting. Her clothes were plain, her hair simply tied back, and she didn't seem to know anyone there. No one paid much attention to her at first, but as the event went on, whispers started to spread. "Who is she?" someone asked softly. "I haven't seen her perform before." "I think she's here by mistake," another person replied, half joking. Each performance before her was loud and full of confidence. Children smiled proudly as they played simple songs. Teenagers performed with flair, and adults added touches of humor or storytelling to keep the crowd entertained. When the host announced that the next performer would be the quiet girl sitting in the corner, a few people exchanged curious looks. She slowly stood up, holding a piece of folded paper in her hand. The audience fell into an awkward silence as she walked toward the stage. Her steps were slow but steady. Her shoes made soft sounds on the wooden floor, and every eye in the room followed her. When she reached the piano, the host looked at her and asked gently, "Are you sure you want to perform?" She nodded once. The host hesitated for a moment, then smiled politely and stepped aside. As she sat down at the piano bench, a soft murmur ran through the audience. Someone whispered, "She looks too nervous to play." Another person chuckled quietly. A small group of teenagers near the back giggled, thinking it would be funny to watch her struggle. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the paper on the stand. The light above the piano cast a warm glow on her face, showing the calm determination hidden behind her shy eyes. She looked down at the keys, fingers hovering over them but not yet touching. The silence stretched. Some people grew impatient, others looked away, already assuming the worst. She took a deep breath. Before she pressed a single key, her mind wandered for a brief moment to where it all began. In her small apartment on the other side of town, she had no real piano, just an old broken keyboard her father had found in a thrift shop years ago. One of the speakers didn't work. Half the keys were out of tune and the sound sometimes faded mid-note. But it was her treasure. Every night after finishing her part-time job at a local store, she would sit in her tiny living room practicing for hours. The neighbors sometimes heard faint melodies through the walls but never complained. They knew she was trying her best to build something out of very little. Her mother used to say, "Music doesn't come from money or fancy instruments. It comes from the heart." That sentence stayed with her through every challenge, every moment she felt like giving up. Back in the hall, the girl finally let her fingers touch the keys. The first sound that came out was soft, almost like a whisper, but it was enough to make people turn their heads. The light tremble in her hands disappeared as she began to play the opening notes of her piece. The room started to quiet down completely. Even the children in the front rows stopped fidgeting. Her music was gentle at first, almost like a lullaby. Then it grew, flowing smoothly from one note to another. The melody was unlike anything the audience had heard that evening. It carried emotion, something raw and deep, something that spoke of lonely nights, silent tears, and quiet hope. Each note told a story without using words. The laughter and whispering that had filled the hall earlier vanished, replaced by stunned silence. A man in the second row leaned forward, his mouth slightly open. One of the judges, who had been checking his notes, slowly lowered his pen. The sound of the piano filled the room completely, wrapping around every person present. The girl was lost in the music now, her expression calm, her body moving slightly with the rhythm. She wasn't performing to impress anyone. She was playing for something much deeper within herself. In those few minutes, she wasn't the shy girl sitting alone in the corner anymore. She was a storyteller, painting emotions through sound. The music rose and fell like waves, sometimes powerful, sometimes tender. Every time she pressed a key, it seemed to carry years of unspoken dreams. The same people who had mocked her now watched in disbelief. One of the teenagers who had giggled earlier felt his smile fade. He nudged his friend who was staring, eyes wide, completely drawn in. Her fingers moved faster now, dancing across the piano with confidence no one expected. The notes shimmered like light through water. The audience could almost feel the journey behind her performance, the struggle, the patience, the quiet determination. A woman in the front row felt tears gathering in her eyes without knowing why. When she reached the middle part of her piece, the sound grew powerful and emotional, filling the entire hall with a breathtaking energy. The piano seemed alive under her touch. Each sound carried the weight of someone who had faced laughter, doubt, and countless silent nights of practice, and turned all of it into beauty. Then, slowly, she began to bring the piece to a close. The notes softened again, slowing down, almost whispering like they had at the start. The ending was simple, but it felt complete, as if the story she told through the piano had reached peace. When the last note faded, the silence in the room was so deep that even a pin dropping would have echoed. For a moment, no one moved. The audience just sat there stunned. Then one person began to clap softly. Another joined in. Within seconds, the whole hall erupted in applause, loud and full of emotion. People stood up from their seats, cheering, whistling, shouting words of praise. The same teenagers who had mocked her earlier were clapping harder than anyone else. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. She had not expected that. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Her hands were still resting on the piano keys, her heart pounding fast. Then, as she stood, the applause only grew louder. The host returned to the stage, smiling warmly, and said, "That was incredible." She smiled shyly, gave a small bow, and stepped down from the stage. As she walked back to her seat, people reached out to shake her hand or whisper compliments. Someone said, "I didn't think anyone could play like that." Another added, "That was the best performance tonight." She could barely speak, still overwhelmed by what had just happened. Sitting down again, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time that night, she felt truly seen, not for what she wore, not for where she came from, but for the music she carried inside her. The sound of the applause still echoed in her ears as she smiled quietly to herself. The fear, the doubt, the whispers, they all faded away, replaced by something she had longed for all her life: respect. No one in that hall would forget her performance. It wasn't just about skill or talent, it was about the heart behind every note she played. She had walked onto that stage as someone people doubted, but she walked off as someone who reminded them all that true beauty often comes from the most unexpected places. That night, the grand piano didn't just play music. It told the story of a girl who dared to believe in herself when no one else did. After the night of her unforgettable performance, life slowly began to change, though not in the way she had imagined. The next morning, she woke up to dozens of messages on her old phone. Someone from the audience had recorded her performance and posted it online. The video had spread quickly, not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because of the emotion people felt while watching it. Comments poured in from strangers saying how her music touched their hearts. Some said they cried, others said they felt inspired. She read each message with disbelief, sitting on the edge of her small bed, her heart racing with joy and nervousness. But even as people praised her, she couldn't shake the memory of the laughter she heard before she started playing. Those moments of mockery still lingered in her mind. She had grown used to being underestimated, but that night had shown her something powerful, that her voice through music could speak louder than anyone's doubt. She went to her part-time job at the grocery store as usual, the same job she had worked for over a year. The store was small and quiet, with a few regular customers who stopped by every morning. Her co-workers were kind, though they never really asked much about her life. That day, however, something felt different. When she walked in, the manager looked up from the counter and smiled widely. "I saw that video," he said. "I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. Another co-worker joined in, saying, "My sister shared it with me last night. You were amazing." She thanked them softly and went about her work, stocking shelves and scanning groceries, but inside, her heart felt lighter. For once, the world wasn't ignoring her. People were beginning to notice the person behind the silence. That evening, when she got home, her mother was waiting at the kitchen table. The old radio was playing softly, and the smell of soup filled the air. Her mother's eyes shone with pride as she said, "You see, I told you, when something comes from the heart, people will feel it." They ate dinner together, talking about the performance, the people in the audience, and how the video was spreading online. Her mother reminded her that fame wasn't the goal. Music was her gift, and it should always stay pure. Those words stayed with her. She didn't want to chase attention. She just wanted to keep sharing what she loved. A few days later, she received a message from a small music school in the city. The director had seen her video and wanted to offer her a chance to study there with a scholarship. At first, she couldn't believe it. She read the message again and again, wondering if it was real. When she showed it to her mother, they both sat in silence, holding the phone like it was something magical. Tears filled her mother's eyes, and she whispered, "This is your chance." The next week, she traveled to the city for the first time. The bus ride was long, and the buildings seemed to grow taller the closer she got. When she arrived at the music school, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. The building was bright and filled with the sound of instruments, violins, flutes, and of course pianos. Students walked around with confidence, carrying sheet music and chatting about their lessons. She felt out of place in her simple clothes, clutching her worn-out bag, but she reminded herself why she was there. The director greeted her warmly and led her to a small practice room. "I watched your performance," he said. "It was pure emotion. You have something special, something that can't be taught." He handed her a folder with the scholarship details and added, "We'd be honored to have you here." Her heart swelled with gratitude. For so long she had practiced alone, teaching herself through trial and error. Now she had a real opportunity to learn from professionals, to grow in ways she never thought possible. That evening she called her mother from a payphone outside the school. Her voice trembled with joy as she said, "They accepted me." Her mother's laughter on the other end was the most comforting sound in the world. Classes began the following week. Everything felt new. The polished pianos, the large practice halls, the teachers who spoke with authority about rhythm, tone, and composition. She was surrounded by students who had trained for years, some from wealthy families, others already performing at events. She felt nervous at first, unsure if she truly belonged there. During her first group lesson, one of the students asked her where she had studied before. When she said she was self-taught, a few raised their eyebrows. Someone whispered, "Self-taught? Then how did she even get in?" The words stung, but she didn't respond. She simply smiled politely and focused on the music sheet in front of her. When it was her turn to play, she sat at the piano, feeling that familiar nervousness again. The same feeling she had before her performance at the community hall. But as soon as she began to play, everything else disappeared. Her music spoke for her. The classroom fell silent, and even the teacher stood still, listening with admiration. When she finished, no one dared to whisper anymore. The same students who had doubted her now looked at her differently. After class, a girl from the group approached her. "That was incredible," she said softly. "I'm sorry for what we said earlier. You play with real feeling." It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to her. Over the next few months, she spent most of her time at the piano. She practiced before sunrise and stayed after classes until the halls were empty. Her teachers noticed her dedication and often praised her improvement. The director sometimes stopped by her practice room just to listen. He told her, "What makes your music powerful is not perfection, it's honesty." Despite her growing success, she stayed humble. She still lived in a small rented room, cooked simple meals, and called her mother every night. She often reminded herself of where she started, that old, broken keyboard that had taught her more than any classroom could. One weekend, the school held a student showcase. This time, she wasn't just a newcomer, she was one of the main performers. The hall was filled with guests, teachers, and families. As she walked to the piano, she recognized that same feeling. From her first performance, nervousness mixed with calm strength. But instead of laughter, she now saw faces waiting with respect and curiosity. She played a new piece that she had composed herself, inspired by her journey so far. The melody carried traces of her past, the quiet nights, the struggle, the small joys, and the dreams that kept her going. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The audience felt every emotion, every story hidden between the notes. When she finished, There was a moment of silence before the applause began. This time she smiled openly, her eyes filled with gratitude. After the performance, the director approached her with a proud expression. "You have a gift," he said. "Don't ever forget where it came from." She nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. Later that night, she walked back to her small room under the city lights. The streets were quiet, and she could still hear the echo of the applause in her mind. She looked up at the sky, whispering softly, "Thank you." She wasn't thinking about fame or success. What mattered most to her was that her music reached people's hearts, the same way it had once saved her own. Every note she played reminded her of who she was, where she came from, and the love that had guided her all along. In that moment, she realized that the journey was far from over. It was only beginning, and this time she was no longer afraid of being seen or heard. Her music had already found its place in the world, and so had she. Months passed, and life in the city became more familiar. The once quiet girl had grown more confident, though she still carried her humble heart wherever she went. Her days were filled with music lessons and endless practice sessions. She spent hours learning the smallest details, how to make each note come alive, how to make people feel something even when no words were spoken. The piano room had become her world, a place where she felt free and understood. Her teachers often spoke about technique, posture, and rhythm, but they also noticed something in her playing that couldn't be taught. Her music always carried emotion, something honest and pure. One of her teachers once told her, "When you play, it feels like you're telling a story that only your heart knows." She smiled shyly, unsure how to respond, but deep down she understood exactly what he meant. Outside of the classroom, she still lived simply. Her small rented room had only a bed, a chair, and a little table by the window. Sometimes she would sit there at night, watching the city lights and thinking about her mother back home. They spoke on the phone almost every evening. Her mother always asked if she was eating well, if she was sleeping enough, and if she still practiced as much as before. Those conversations gave her strength. One evening, as she was leaving the music school, she noticed a poster on the wall. It announced an upcoming national piano competition. The event was well known, featuring some of the most talented young musicians in the country. The winner would receive a scholarship to study abroad and perform on some of the biggest stages. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the poster. The thought of competing scared her, but something inside her whispered that she had to try. The next day, she mentioned the competition to her teacher. He looked thoughtful and said, "It will be challenging. You'll be up against students who have been training since they were children, but if you feel ready, you should go for it." His encouragement gave her courage. She filled out the registration form and started preparing. From that day on, her life became even more focused. She spent long hours in the practice room, sometimes forgetting to eat. She wanted her piece to be perfect, not just technically, but emotionally. She wanted it to tell her story, to show the world where she came from and how far she had come. The melody she chose was one she had written herself, inspired by her mother and the years she spent learning on that broken keyboard. It was full of hope and quiet strength. Weeks turned into months as the competition day drew closer. Some classmates teased her lightly, saying things like, "You're brave to join. Most people never even try." Others were supportive, offering tips and encouragement. She accepted everything with a smile, not letting doubt take over. Every note she played reminded her why she started. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. The event was held in a grand concert hall in the heart of the city. The stage was enormous, the piano gleamed under the lights, and rows of seats stretched far back into the shadows. She stood backstage, feeling her hands shake slightly. Around her were other contestants dressed elegantly, chatting confidently with one another. She felt small among them, but she reminded herself of that first performance in the community hall, the night when no one believed in her until she played. When her name was called, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, and for a second she couldn't see the audience. She could only feel the weight of silence. Sitting at the piano, she closed her eyes for a moment and thought of her mother. She imagined her sitting at home, praying and waiting by the phone. That thought calmed her. Her fingers touched the keys and the music began. The first few notes were soft and uncertain, but as she continued, the melody grew stronger, richer and more alive. Every sound echoed with emotion. It was as if the piano itself was speaking for her. The audience sat still, listening closely. Some leaned forward, drawn in by the depth of feeling in her music. As the piece went on, her nerves faded away. She was no longer aware of the judges or the crowd. She was back in her small living room, playing on that broken keyboard, pouring her heart into every note. The sound of the piano filled the hall like sunlight spreading through clouds. When she reached the final section, the melody soared, capturing both sadness and triumph. It felt like her entire journey was being told in those few minutes. When the last note faded, she lifted her hand slowly from the keys. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that means everyone is too moved to speak. Then came the applause, soft at first, then louder and louder until the whole hall was filled with clapping. She stood up, bowed quietly, and walked off the stage with tears in her eyes. Backstage, some of the other contestants congratulated her. Even those who had seemed distant earlier were now smiling warmly. One of them said, "That was beautiful. I've never heard something that felt so real." She thanked them, still overwhelmed by emotion. All she wanted at that moment was to call her mother. She stepped outside to the quiet garden behind the hall, pulled out her phone, and dialed home. When her mother answered, her voice was already trembling with excitement. "How did it go?" she asked. "It went well," she replied softly, holding back tears. "I played my heart out." Her mother laughed through her tears. "I knew you would. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her heart still racing, thinking about the competition and all the faces in the audience. She didn't care whether she won or not. Just being there, sharing her music on such a stage, felt like a victory already. 2 days later, she returned to the hall for the results. The atmosphere was filled with excitement and tension. All the contestants sat together, waiting for the announcement. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, trying not to think too much. When the judges finally took the stage, the room went silent. They began announcing the winners, starting from third place. Her name wasn't called. Her heart sank a little, but she reminded herself that she had done her best. Then they announced the second place. It wasn't her either. Finally, the head judge smiled and said, "And the first prize goes to a performer whose music touched us deeply, not because of perfection, but because of truth. Please welcome our winner." He called her name. For a moment, she couldn't move. It felt unreal. The people around her began clapping, smiling, patting her on the shoulder. Slowly, she stood up and walked to the stage, her eyes shining with disbelief and joy. The judges handed her a small golden trophy and an envelope with the scholarship details. One of them said softly, "Never lose that sincerity in your playing. It's what makes you special." As she looked out at the crowd, all she could think of was her mother and that old keyboard. She wished her mother could have been there to see it. When the event ended, she stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her face. She looked up at the stars, smiling through tears. That moment wasn't just about winning. It was about everything that had led her there. The laughter she endured, the sleepless nights, the long hours of practice, and the faith that never let her give up. Her story had come full circle, from a small community hall to one of the grandest stages in the country. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but now she believed in herself in a way she never had before. Her music had opened doors, but more importantly, it had opened hearts, and that, she thought, was the real reward. As she walked home, holding the trophy close to her chest, she realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes, the world doubts you until you show them who you truly are. And when you do, you don't just prove them wrong, you inspire them to believe too. Winning the national competition changed everything for her, yet she remained the same quiet, humble girl inside. After the event, her picture appeared in newspapers and online articles. People began calling her the girl with the golden touch. Music schools wanted to invite her to perform, and several teachers offered to mentor her for free. It all felt unreal. Just months ago, she was playing on a broken keyboard in a small apartment. Now she was being recognized by people who had never known her name before. The scholarship she won was to study in another country, at a prestigious music academy, known for producing world-class pianists. It felt like a dream she had never dared to dream. The idea of leaving home frightened her, but her mother encouraged her to go. "You've worked too hard for this," her mother said gently. "Go and show the world what's inside you. I'll be right here, cheering for you." The day she left was bittersweet. The small apartment, the quiet neighborhood, the people who had watched her grow up, it was all part of her. As the bus rolled away, she looked out the window and saw her mother waving, tears in her eyes but a proud smile on her face. That image stayed with her long after the city disappeared behind the hills. Her new life abroad was both exciting and overwhelming. Everything was different: the language, the culture, the food, even the weather. The academy was enormous, filled with students from around the world. Many of them had been trained since childhood, with personal tutors and expensive instruments. For a while she felt out of place again, just like she did on her first day at the music school in the city. But then she reminded herself that she had already faced doubt before, and every time she had let her music speak for her. Her first few weeks were challenging. Classes were strict and teachers pushed students to their limits. They expected perfection in every note. She struggled to keep up at first, but her dedication set her apart. Every night, long after most students had gone back to their dorms, she stayed in the practice room, playing until her fingers ached. The janitor often found her there at midnight, eyes half closed from exhaustion but still smiling. One evening, a well-known pianist from the academy stopped outside her practice room. He had heard the sound of her playing while passing by. When she finished, he opened the door and said softly, "You play with emotion. That's something many lose while chasing perfection. Don't ever lose that." His words gave her strength. It reminded her that music wasn't about showing off. It was about feeling. As months went by, she grew not only as a pianist but also as a person. Her confidence slowly bloomed. She started meeting other students who respected her talent. Some even asked her to teach them how she played with such depth. She began to understand that her struggles had given her something no classroom could, a connection between pain and beauty. But even in her success, she missed home deeply. Every time she performed, she imagined her mother sitting in the front row smiling proudly. They spoke on video calls whenever possible, though the time difference made it difficult. Her mother's voice always brought her peace, reminding her where she came from. She promised to return home one day, to perform in the same community hall where it all began. Near the end of her first year abroad, the academy announced a special concert. It would feature a few selected students to perform in front of famous musicians, talent scouts, and sponsors. It was a rare chance to be noticed by the world. When she saw her name on the list of chosen performers, she could hardly believe it. The piece she chose was a new composition, one she had written in memory of her mother's sacrifices and the simple love that kept her going. She named it Home. The melody was soft and emotional, carrying the sound of longing, warmth, and hope. Every part of the song held a piece of her life. The night of the concert, the grand hall was filled with people dressed in elegant clothes, their eyes fixed on the stage. She waited backstage, her heart pounding. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she felt a deep responsibility to play not just for herself, but for everyone who had believed in her when no one else did. When it was her turn, she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights shining down on her. She took a moment to breathe, remembering her first performance years ago when the crowd had laughed before she played. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It reminded her how far she had come. Her fingers touched the keys and the sound filled the room. The music began softly, almost like a whisper, then grew richer with every note. The melody carried emotion that words could never express. It spoke of struggle, love, and gratitude. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others wiped tears from their faces. It wasn't just a performance, it was a story being told through sound. By the time she finished, the hall was silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, thunderous and full of emotion. People stood to their feet, clapping endlessly. She smiled through tears, bowing deeply. She had played from her heart, and it had reached every person in that room. After the concert, many people came to speak with her. Some were teachers, some musicians, and some were simply listeners who had been touched by her music. One elderly man, a respected composer, said, "Your music reminds me why I fell in love with this art. Never stop playing from your soul." That night, when she returned to her dorm, she sat by the window, looking out at the quiet city below. The lights twinkled like stars. She picked up her phone and called her mother. When her mother answered, she told her everything: the applause, the praise, the way people cried during her performance. Her mother listened quietly, then said softly, "I always knew the world would hear your heart one day." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she smiled. "It's all because of you," she whispered. From that day, her name began to spread even further. Invitations came from different cities and even other countries. She performed in small theaters and large concert halls, always staying true to her roots. No matter where she went, she carried her old keyboard memory with her, a reminder that greatness often begins in the humblest of places. But amid all the applause and recognition, she remained grounded. She never forgot the girl who once sat nervously at a piano while people laughed. She knew that the real magic wasn't in the fame, it was in touching lives through her music. Years later, she finally returned home. The town looked the same, quiet and peaceful. When she walked into the community hall where it had all started, she found the same old piano waiting on the stage. The hall had been repaired and freshly painted, but the memories were still there. Word spread quickly that she had come back, and soon the seats were filled again, just like before. As she sat down at the piano, she looked out at the crowd and saw familiar faces. Neighbors, friends, teachers, and most importantly, her mother sitting in the front row smiling proudly. The room fell silent as she began to play. The melody was warm and full of love, the sound of homecoming and gratitude. Every note was a thank you to the people who believed in her. When she finished, the audience stood clapping with tears in their eyes. She stood up, bowed, and for the first time felt complete peace. She had come full circle, from being the girl no one believed in to the woman whose music could move hearts across the world. That night, as she walked out of the hall, her mother took her hand and whispered, "See? I told you music from the heart never goes unheard." She smiled, holding her mother close, knowing that no stage, no trophy, and no applause could ever mean more than that simple truth. Her journey wasn't over, but she had found what she was always looking for. Not fame, not perfection, but connection. The kind that can only be created when someone dares to play their truth, one note at a time. Years passed, and her journey continued to unfold in ways she had never imagined. After returning to her hometown and performing in the community hall, she traveled to many countries, sharing her music with people from all walks of life. Each concert was different, but every time she sat at a piano, the feeling was the same, the sense of connection, the quiet understanding that music could reach hearts even when words could not. Even with international recognition, she remained humble. She remembered the early days, the nights spent practicing on a broken keyboard, the laughter of people who doubted her. Those memories shaped her, keeping her grounded and reminding her that talent alone was never enough. It was perseverance, passion, and heart that made her music real. Her mother remained her anchor. Despite the distance, they spoke regularly. Sometimes her mother would offer advice, sometimes just encouragement, but always love. The girl who had once feared the judgment of a small crowd now had an audience of thousands. Yet the quiet conversations with her mother were what mattered most. She also made it a point to give back. She started workshops for children in underprivileged neighborhoods, teaching them how to find their own voices in music. She told them, "You don't need a perfect piano or fancy lessons to make beautiful music. What matters is your heart." Many of the children had never touched an instrument before, yet under her guidance, their creativity blossomed. She found joy in watching them struggle, learn, and eventually create music that came from deep inside themselves. Despite her busy schedule, she always carved out time for personal growth. She experimented with composing new pieces, blending different styles and traditions she encountered during her travels. Each composition told a story, often inspired by the people she met and the places she visited. Her music became not just a performance but a living diary of her experiences, emotions, and observations. She also learned to handle challenges gracefully. Not every performance went perfectly. Sometimes the piano would be out of tune, or her fingers would slip, or the audience wouldn't respond as she hoped. But she embraced these moments, understanding that imperfection was part of life. She would finish the piece, take a deep breath, and let the music speak again. Over time, these experiences made her stronger, more confident, and more adaptable. One of the most memorable moments of her career came when she was invited to perform in a grand international music festival. The audience included world-famous musicians, critics, and music enthusiasts. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves as she walked onto the stage, but this time the nervousness was accompanied by excitement. She knew her music was ready to speak. The performance began softly, each note carefully placed, each chord resonating with emotion. The audience sat in rapt attention, sensing the depth behind every melody. She played her original piece, inspired by her hometown, her mother, and the countless people who had believed in her along the way. As the music flowed, she closed her eyes, letting her hands move naturally over the keys. The hall was filled with pure emotion. Some listeners were moved to tears. Others whispered to each other in awe. When the final note faded, the silence was profound. Then came a standing ovation, louder and more heartfelt than anything she had experienced before. After the festival, journalists and critics wrote extensively about her performance. They praised not just her technical skill, but the sincerity and emotion that infused every note. She was invited to more events, more collaborations, and even offered opportunities to record her compositions professionally. But she always remembered what truly mattered: the connection she created through music. She continued to compose, perform, and teach, but she also made time to explore life beyond the piano. She traveled to different countries, learning about cultures, traditions, and histories. Each journey inspired new music, new stories, and new perspectives. She discovered that life itself was a vast composition, filled with highs and lows, and that music was a way to express the inexpressible. Back in her hometown, she eventually helped establish a small music academy, offering scholarships to talented children who lacked resources. She made sure that the academy maintained the spirit of her own journey, learning with passion, practicing with dedication, and performing with honesty. She wanted to give others the chance she had once received, to prove that talent could thrive anywhere if nurtured with heart. Her mother watched every milestone with pride. She often told her, "You were always meant for this. But more importantly, you never let life's challenges take away your heart." Those words stayed with her, a reminder that no matter how far she traveled, the essence of who she was remained unchanged. As she grew older, she reflected on the path she had taken. From the shy girl mocked for sitting at a piano, to a world-renowned pianist whose music inspired thousands, it had been a journey of courage, perseverance, and love. She realized that every struggle, every doubt, and every moment of fear had shaped her into the person she had become. Her story wasn't just about music. It was about believing in oneself when the world doesn't, about transforming ridicule into inspiration, and about touching lives through something as simple yet profound as a melody. One quiet evening, she returned to the community hall where it all began. The room was empty, bathed in soft light. She walked to the piano, running her fingers gently over the keys. Memories flooded back, the laughter, the whispers, the stunned silence, the applause. She sat down and began to play, not for an audience, but for herself, for her mother, and for every moment that had brought her to this point. The music was soft at first, tender and reflective. It grew, carrying with it the weight of her experiences, the joy of her successes, and the quiet strength that had always guided her. Each note was a testament to resilience, hope, and the transformative power of passion. She played until her fingers ached and her heart felt full, until the echoes of the melody lingered long after the last note faded. That night she realized something simple yet profound. Her music had always been about connection. It had begun as a way to express herself when words failed, but over the years it had become a bridge to others' hearts. Every performance, every composition, every student she taught had been part of a larger story, a story of courage, love, and belief. She closed the piano lid gently, smiling. She understood now that success was not measured by applause, awards, or fame, but by the lives touched and the hearts moved. The shy girl who once faced ridicule had grown into a woman who inspired countless others, simply by staying true to herself and her music. As she walked out of the hall that night, she felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been beautiful and transformative. She had turned mockery into admiration, fear into confidence, and a simple passion into a life that touched the world, and she knew with quiet certainty that her music would continue to carry her story forward, one note at a time, inspiring hearts for years to come.